What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Next Gen Sales Leader Podcast. I'm here with Ben Holley, who is the first sales hire at cyft.ai. And just so you guys know, Ben is one of the thought leaders on LinkedIn around go-to-market outbound, all the AI stuff that's happening, all the cool tech, the nitty-gritty, what's happening in the market that you would never know about unless you were deep in the weeds. Ben's going to give us the lay of the land, what's happening with outbound in 2025. And as a salesperson himself, he's actually tactically in the weeds, doing the damn thing. So welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks so much for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. So where do you think we should start here? Because I know that there's so much fun stuff to jump into. Obviously, we can get into AI, we can get into the cool outbound tools that we all use, where the market's going. What do you think would be the number one thing that if anyone was to listen to this, you'd want them to know? I think that's a great place to start.
The number one thing that I want people to know, I feel like that answer is going to be way more esoteric
That's okay.
than what maybe what they want. The number one thing to know is that as good as AI and all the sales tools are, is that if you don't have a fundamental understanding of your buyer and the market, you're just going to be pouring gas on the wrong fire, which is like something I try to impart upon people when they ask me, like what sales tools they should be using. Cause I think that's like this totally like wrong question. Like I have stuff that works for me like really well, I think. Um, but what works for me may just be like totally terrible for somebody else. So I think that's the one thing that everybody should know.
Yeah, it's everyone thinks that just because like AI is around or just because the tech is getting easier to use, that somehow like old school standard sales and marketing 101 doesn't apply. And it doesn't
Mhm.
matter, how cool, Apify is at web scraping or Octave is at like ICP definition or whatever other cool tool like Clay you're using. If you don't fundamentally deeply understand your ICP, you are screwed. And I'll even add to that that like I think that all the books that if you're in marketing or if you've tried to like do anything around startups, you've probably heard of Alex Ramosi and Russell Brunson and all these kind of thought leaders, Dan Kennedy, Jay Abraham, all the copywriting guys. And they always say like top 100, build your avatar, your persona, your ICP, know who these people are. And they always mention it, but I actually think they don't go deep enough. I think there's actually like a much deeper discussion about like how do you even think about who your ideal customer profile is and how do you build that first list? And for me, like what we did just at one company, I'll just give an example on, which is Source Water. It was a oil and gas water marketplace, which sounds like the most random thing on planet Earth. But basically, in the oil and gas industry, there's about 3 to 13 times the amount of water that comes out of the ground than oil and gas, which everyone's like, what? And it's like, well, it's dead dinosaurs in an ocean down there and they're sucking it out of the ground. So we had this marketplace and we had a very particular ideal customer profile in mind, which at the time was what we call water manager at big oil and gas companies. And we thought that was our guy. And I went like deep into the desert of Midland, Texas, and I spent 6 months there and I had no clue anything about oil and gas field operations. I didn't know about water management. I didn't know what an SWD was. I didn't know what a battery was, which probably you don't know either. It's tanks that hold all this fluid at the surface level. And for me to really actually go through the journey of discovering ideal customer profile, I literally had to go what my co-founder at the time, Josh Adler, said was I went tribal. Like I literally had to immerse myself. I found myself at like 2 a.m, stuck on the side of like a dirt path without any Wi-Fi, with coyotes chasing me through a freaking field as I'm looking for like a windmill that generated a water source. Like if you're not going into your clients or your ideal customer profile's life and immersing yourself and doing field walk-alongs and watching them, you're just not playing the game correctly. And I used to think like there was some magic pill of like, how do you do market research? And some guy was going to come with a report that was just going to explain it to me. And the damn truth is this, is that you have to go have 1,000 conversations and you got to go live in the life and you got to become obsessed. And if you don't want to do that, then just don't be an entrepreneur. That's my like humble opinion. But I think you're right,
Yeah.
is like, that's what it takes, not the tech. The tech just amplifies and helps you do things faster and more efficiently once you figured out positioning. So I know that's a mouthful, but you hit a nerve
Yeah.
there. So I agree with you.
No, I mean, I mean, you're dead on. Like, technology amplifies what you're already doing, and if it's bad, it's going to amplify you performing poorly, which isn't good. But yeah, so like I do a couple things. I'm in like 5 different. At SIFT we sell to outsourced IT providers, aka MSPs. Probably somebody out there knows what that is. And I'm in a bunch of their discords. I'm in Reddit, the MSP subreddit. I go to at least 2 MSP events a month. There's one in Greenville, South Carolina, and there's one here in Charlotte. And I just go there. I don't go there to sell anything necessarily, although I suppose people are like, "Oh yeah, this I don't go places to like sell stuff." I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm not going there to like pitch slap people. I'm just going to hang out
Right.
and like learn about them. But eventually one of them might want to buy something, so I'll be there when they do." But yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that like your company has a culture and your buyers also have a culture. And I think one of the reasons like cold calling, for instance, people don't do very well with it because they don't really understand their buyer's culture, like what's acceptable to them and not acceptable to them, and the how they talk to each other when they're at a trade show. What do they talk about? Like things like that. And in the age of like I'm 32, and so I'm like not that old, but the a lot of the people who are like younger than me who have only had like inside sales, remote sales jobs, especially like in SaaS where they might not really go to trade shows or anything like that. Um, yeah, I mean they're very much like missing out on that element is my observation. And so yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic with, I think you're right, the younger generation. And I don't want to be ageist by any means, but there is a clear trend. And the trend is worth mentioning, especially like for sales leadership or people that are hiring sales reps, is that you're right. They're not used to one, deeply forming social relationships. I know that sounds like harsh, but I can
Hmm.
just tell you, having now gone in as a fractional chief revenue officer at a number of mid-tier companies that have anywhere from 4 to 50 SDRs, and I meet the SDRs, and there's a clear divide between those that are, say, under the age of, say, 25, 30. That's kind of like the gray area, and above 30.
Hmm.
And in those that are under are typically only willing to do text message, social DMs, and email. And they absolutely seem to refuse to do outbound cold calling. Now, I'm making broad generalizations, so I'm sure there's a guy out there who's like 22 is just crushing. And I think this is also like product and industry specific. Like if you are in the solar industry, you're used to just go pounding the pavements door to door. So I'm not trying to like make this just massively, uh, overly broad statement. But I think generally, especially in the SaaS world, especially in inside sales, people over rely on the automation inbound stuff. And even the outbound cold emails, like people get these responses. And I tell them, like, you'll have an 80% better take rate if you just call them and you respond via email and then you just connect with them on LinkedIn. It's like so freaking basic on the multi channel. And it's like kind of obvious, but people just don't want to do it. And so they're scared of picking up the phone. And I just really believe that's a detriment to the business as a whole. So I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think so with the MSPs that we work with, a lot of them like culturally, they're technicians, like they're passionate about technology. A lot of them say, well, we don't like selling, we don't like bothering people with cold calls and all this kind of stuff. And like when I got into, when I started working with IT people and IT leaders, I guess, I kind of thought maybe this was like unique to them, but as I've sort of like zoomed back out since my time at SIFT, I've realized that this is not unique to them at all. And in fact, all entrepreneurs who start businesses that require outbound sales, 99% of them, I'm going to say, uh, get to the point where they realize that they are in sales. Like if you are running a small business or whatever kind of business, really, if you're the CEO, like your job is to sell and find people who can do everything else, like everything else, product development, customer service, whatever. Like your job is to sell. And when I was running a recording studio, like if I had known that, I would probably still be running a recording studio. you know, and so it's like when I work with a lot of these IT leaders, I'm not like coaching them or anything, so I'm not like an expert in MSP sales by any means, but it's just like a very common thread that they don't like sales, and a lot of people don't like sales because they fear rejection. But I think like products and software can be built, technology can be set up, implemented in a process. If you hand somebody a piece of paper that says, stick this cable into this port and install this piece of software on your server, this thing will work. But sales isn't like that. Like it's an emotional exercise, it's not an intellectual exercise. And so it's very like mysterious. And that's not even accounting for understanding your ICP, which is what we were talking about earlier. So there's like so many different layers to it. It really is its own discipline, and I think people who like haven't experienced and deeply thought through that, they definitely have like this idea that it's click button get banana, and that you just make more phone calls to get more sales, which actually, if you make more phone calls, you will get more sales. So that's a bad example, but like more inputs, however they are. And the other thing too, the thing about like SDRs and SaaS, a lot of times I think what's happened to our industry is that there's a lot of people out there who don't need SDR teams, who don't have product market fit, they don't have marketing support, they don't have brand recognition. And like when you read Predictable Revenue, I think that's the name of the book. I read it a long time ago. By Aaron Ross. The way that he theorized the SDR position was that the SDR role would be a demand capture role as opposed to demand generation. And now we have SDR teams that are expected to generate demand, and which is possible, though not ideal. I can generate demand. I'm very good at my job. Like, and this isn't me, like I've always been a top performer, so I can generate demand. But most people can't afford me, and they definitely can't afford 10 to 50 of me usually. So if when you're getting kids, I mean, I'm not saying that in a disparaging manner, but when you're getting people who have a limited career experience to try to go generate demand for your product that doesn't really have product market fit and brand recognition, like that's not really how SDRs were theorized, and it's not how they really work well in practice. And so when you look at most SDR teams, and at least in SaaS, they're revenue negative. They're not really building pipeline. They're just setting meetings. Um, and everybody's got to start somewhere. But it's like you talk to these sales leaders, and I'm like, well, what are these guys do? Like, what are these people doing? What is your SDR team like really bringing to the table? And they're like, well, we know that it's revenue negative, but they're hiring pipeline for AEs. And I'm thinking to myself, like, so they're not making you guys any money as SDRs, but you're hoping that when you hand them the full cycle and a much larger responsibility within your business, that they're going to somehow rise to the challenge. And it's just very bizarre. It's just very bizarre the way that like people talk about like the SDR function these days. Um, I don't know if you've experienced that like in any of your consulting stuff.
Well, I think so. I have a lot of thoughts on the SDR role, and I think that the response is contextual and it depends heavily on the scenario we find ourselves in. So, for example, if we're talking about and this is where like the question is what matters in sales and marketing and B2B in general. And generally speaking, like I actually have a what matters diagram. And on the
Mm-hmm.
right side of the diagram, it's like the sales team, which is like the least important function. And that's like wild to people when they're like, what, you're a CRO, you're a VP of sales, you've been a salesperson. How can you say that? And on the left-hand side is market selection, industry selection, offer selection, price points, and then it gets into the demand gen, and then it gets into, some more of the positional stuff and the sales operations stuff and the list building stuff. And so I'm, speaking about this, what matters from left to right. But for me, it's like, okay, if you're in the wrong market, in a dying market with a limited total addressable market of say 1,000 people, and it doesn't matter how good your shit is, you're going to run out of it, the opportunities and the demand rather quickly. So it's like, yeah, you could hire an SDR, you could have them call every single one of them and dead, right? It's like, why is the guy not generating results after 4 months? Well, you ran out of total addressable market. And then there's like also the question of like, how complex is the sale, right? So if we're in a, very simple kind of obvious thing, like I'm going to use video production. Video production on one hand can be extremely complex if it's like for B2B business with big production sets and big requirements, or it can be extremely simple of like edit my Instagram reels. And so depending upon the complexity of the offer, you need a different level of maturity in that sales rep. So like, for example, let's just say I have an offer that is for video production editing, and I have a very low ticket offer of say $1,000 a month to just get unlimited little edits to your reels on Instagram, for example. Uh, and let's say that I do a hell of a lot of like Instagram content creation and it's all organic, and I just have like say 5 inbounds a day or 10 inbounds a day, and I have like a part-time SDR. Well, you don't have to have Einstein sitting in there to act on that demand. So when it comes inbound, they jump on the call. It's like, hey, why'd you want to jump on the call? It's like, well, you don't have to like be freaking super intelligent to just simply ask why they're there. Oh, well, I saw this content. I thought you guys could do that. How does it work? Then you could say and going through the standard explanation, because it's mostly marketing led, but most of the trust has already been established at the organic content level. The sales rep probably isn't going to be the primary determination of whether the sale occurs or not. It's based upon the actual trust in the original thought leader through that strategy, because it's just not complex and it's probably not high price. And if it's the right, it's more about qualification than anything. Do you have the budget? Are you actually in need of this type of service? What are you doing now? Does it suck? Can we do it better? Do you trust us? So if you can overcome those kind of basic fundamentals, it's like a pretty straightforward job. Now, when you get to the higher level position or the more complex sale, for example, I'm going to use oil and gas software sales, right? Where it's like you have a really complex deal cycle where you have multiple people in the buying committee, where you have some guy at the field level who works in the desert, and then some guy who works in the office in the desert, and then there's a counterpart in Houston in the city who then has a health, safety, and environmental person, plus he has an IT group and a procurement group. And you have to like wrangle all those people into this kind of zeitgeist within the company to say, there is this thing we need to solve. That is probably not going to be done by a typical SDR. By an SDR at all. Frankly, that's probably a full cycle enterprise sales rep who's taking that from cradle to grave. And then there's somebody in between, right? Where you have like a moderately complex sale and you have a channel that is like, or excuse me, a market that is really difficult to penetrate with cold email, with LinkedIn, with text messages, even with like snail mail. So your options are either you call them or you go to a trade show. So in that scenario, I can say in the oil and gas industry for software, I've had tremendous success making cold calls because one, they don't get cold called a lot. And two is they typically don't see like a professional marketer or sales team like us speaking the way that we do. So we just simply cut through the noise because we're just different. So I guess I'm just saying all this to say that, there is no like right answer to this. And I actually have a whole training called the SDR training where I say SDRs are not just appointment setters. They're what they call the anthropologist, the detective, they're the closer. Like there's all these different kind of mindsets I have the SDR go through because I have higher expectations of the SDR role, which I think is more old school. Whereas like the new school thing is like, okay, they're just going to take inbound demand and just qualify and convert it into a meeting. And I just have higher standards for the SDRs I work with. But I don't think there's like a right answer here. I think it depends. It depends on how complex it is, how big the business is, how well known the market is, and the product awareness. Last thing I'll say, because I'm on a diatribe right now, but I'll say that like it depends on market maturity as well. Because if you have like a really high demand market, and the example that I think Frank Kern comes up with is like the hot dog stand outside the bar at 2 a.m. It's like all you need a guy to do is say, hot dogs, sales done, right? Because the demand, the awareness of the problem in the person's mind is hungry as hell. And the solution is well known, food. And the product is well known, hot dog. And it doesn't really matter what brand it is. It's like there. And so it's like, you have that, I want that. Okay. So you just have to like raise your hand. So there's certainly like SDRs that I think have gotten themselves into positions where they think they're great, but they just have a really amazing brand and an amazing demand and product behind them. Examples, Alex Hormozy's SDRs, Like I called up and I was talking to SDR, and this guy was just like just a normal kid out of college. He might as well have been talking to like his buddy, you know. And I'm sure he was trained, and I'm sure he practices. But it's like, dude, anybody who has like a normal personality who is an interest in like talking to somebody and isn't scared could close that sale because you have freaking Alex
Mhm.
Hormozy standing next to you, you know. And it's like everyone wants to get to that guy. So, anyways, I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it's a more nuanced question of like, is there a right way or wrong way or good or bad, or how should you handle it?
Yeah, well, it also depends on like, it largely depends on the ACV too, because the way the unit economics work out on SDRs is that if you have a very low ACV, then and the SDRs will be expected to generate a lot of leads or
Mhm,
appointments or whatever you want to call it. Um, Whereas like I worked at the last company I worked at before I worked at SIFT. Our largest client gave us $1 million a year, more than that, I think. So that was not our ACV, like by any means. Like it was, a whale
mhm,
for us. Um, but the way that we were compensated made sense. When we went to hit quota, you really only needed to generate 4 opportunities per month. Um, and it made sense just because of the way that these deals could shape up. But I worked at a company um, at PandaDoc where it was like very much inbound demand capture for the SDRs, and like I don't remember what our meeting quota was, but it was something quite high, like 30 or 40 or something like that. Um, and yeah, when you have those sorts of expectations, that's when things start to like get out of whack.
mhm.
Um, because we don't have we didn't have a product that we could really go outbound with. It was a PLG, um, not just a PLG motion, but like a true like PLG product as well. Because it was like e-sign, but we had all this other stuff that you
And
could do to
PLG is
like
product-led
workflow. But
growth for anyone who doesn't know what that means. It means the product is so good that there's a word of mouth and it grows without sales and marketing.
yeah, and so the other thing about like PLG is it's not just like a growth lever, but it's also like the way I think about it is that when you're doing sales led, um, like true sales led motion, you're not talking to anybody who doesn't fit in that very narrow sort of ICP that we've built. Like if you only talk to oil and gas companies and like some shipping company comes to you, be like, hey guys, listen, I'm sorry, we don't work with shipping
Right.
companies. Like, I'm sorry. Um, and with a PLG product, you're like, yeah, we'll work with anybody because the product is flexible enough for them to figure out their own use case. So, but there its own unique challenges come with that because you don't really know who to market to. You don't know what segment, what vertical, what industry to market to. Your salespeople don't really know what a good deal looks like, and so you just have to rely on like volume
Mhm.
of leads and hope that enough of them convert to turn into something. And so I did not enjoy that environment because like the marketing team had all the power, and as a salesperson, it felt like nobody cared about what we thought. So, but I won't rehash old drama. Let's skip over that. But yeah.
Yeah, I was part of a product-led growth type company with Wellsite Navigator where we actually bought it after the initial growth phase, which is in 2012. Somebody had this idea of taking publicly available government data of where these well locations are. And think about like an oil well, like a job sites where guys go to literally drill in the ground. And there's a bunch of things that happen there. They have to actually get a drill and they have to drill in the ground. And then they have to do things to explode the rock. So if you've heard of fracking, and then so that's a whole different crew
Hmm.
of people. And then there's a bunch of basically trucks and guys that go out to the field and they have to do this stuff. So that means that like finding these locations is like important and knowing the name of them, knowing the GPS locations, getting directions to them. So this guy just had this idea one day, guy out of I think it was Saskatchewan, Canada, and he just said, "Okay, I'm going to go scrape all the data from." And I don't even know if it was scraping. I think he literally just called the state agency. In, for example, Texas, it's the Railroad Commission, which is I don't know why they call it railroad, but it's the same people that manage the oil and gas industry. And they have a database, like old school CSV type stuff, and even older school data formats. And he would just basically get the download every week, and he would put it into a database and he basically built a standard little application for iOS and Android, and super 1990s looking when he launched it, but nobody had done that before. And some guy in the oil field tried it out. I'm sure that in the beginning he had a few guys that he just knew. I was like, hey, try this out. And it just caught fire. It was like all of a sudden this guy was like sending it. It kind of had a natural built-in virality to it because you had to share the GPS coordinates or the pin with another person. So it was like, hey man, like I actually have this app. I'll send it to you. Just get it. And then you send it, and then he has the well and he can see it on the map. So it kind of had this built-in product-led growth type of idea. And so it went to 30,000 users without any sales or marketing. I mean, there literally was not a sales or marketing person, and no sales calls were made, no ads were placed, not even like, I mean, the website was super basic. There was no social media at the time around that. And it was like one part-time developer and one guy, and that was it. And so it's just a good example of like a new kind of breakthrough idea because mobile apps at the time, with GPS, geospatial data was still relatively new, even though it wasn't like extremely new. And especially in the oil and gas, it was like groundbreaking. So it was like all of that kind of combined into very simple product, but it solved the big problem of finding oil wells. And so it caught fire. So then when we bought the company in 2019, we just it was doing, I think we bought it for $1 million. It was doing $300,000 in revenue annually. And it was like the stupidest business model on planet Earth. It was like one-time $3 lifetime subscription purchases, and it was still doing $300,000 a year. And so,
Dude, you guys got it for a 3x revenue multiplier? That's like peanuts.
yeah. Well, this is where like I think this actually gets back to what I said when I started, which is, do you want to go really understand your market? Go spend 2 years and talk to 1,000 people, try to sell something just so you learn. And you're going to stumble across opportunities. And so oftentimes, like, especially as a startup, when you go to market, the first 5 variations of what you're doing, and it sounds like you're doing that at SIFT now, is like you're trying to figure out product market fit and you're trying to figure out what the demand is. And for us, in my experience with all the SaaS and data as a service companies, DaaS companies, you go out to the market, you try, and then you realize, we got it kind of wrong. And then you go do it again. But the more interesting thing, that's kind of obvious. That's like super lean startup, 4 steps of the epiphany, customer discovery 101. If you've gone down that source of books, you know what I'm talking
Yeah, I'm
about.
reading Lean Startup right now, actually.
Changed my life. Eric Schmidt, what's his name? Eric,
Yep.
is it?
Something like that.
So Eric Rice. So that changed my life. But the truth is it's even deeper than that. It's not just go talk to customers. You're going to start to realize things not just about the customers, but the lay of the land in terms of the market dynamics, who the major players are. Like you thought you were solving this problem, but it turns out there's this related problem that's being solved by this other weird solution that you think you can crush. And it's kind of like, I call it like the Zelda map, which is you go, everyone knows what I'm talking about with Zelda. I think, at least if you're older, it's like this little kind of uh, game where you have a little guy on a map and you can see the entire map in front of you, but there's like part of it's blacked out because you haven't unlocked that part. So you have to like walk down the trail to where you can see, and then you find a wizard and the wizard goes, hello. And then he's like, talking to you. And then finally he's like, well, you need this magic potion. You got to talk to the lady at the barn. And then you go over there and then the map kind of opens up a little bit. And by the end of the game, you kind of see the whole map. You see all the players, you see the little realities, you see the little side trails you shouldn't have gone down where the ogre lives. I think startups are kind of like that. And I think that like the competitive advantage isn't actually like all of a sudden just coming up with this much better technology. It's actually just knowing the customer significantly better than anyone else because you've tried all the little like fractures of possibilities and you just know, okay, I tried these 800 variations. This is why everyone needs this. This is where I'm competitively different. And that's where you succeed. So how did I get on that trail? Because I just came back to the beginning, but we were just talking about what were we talking about before that? Sorry.
I can't remember.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like we went too deep on that subject. But yeah, I just generally think that like for product-led growth, which is where we were at, I don't know where this guy for Wellsite Navigator came up with the original idea, but I do know that for me in my experience, like you have to go through that journey. Now, I think I'm also hyper analytical and I probably overthink things. And I think that sometimes people just get lucky. I've seen people just like, they worked in the field, they knew a problem for themselves, and they just tried something to solve their own problem and it just caught fire. That's why like Y Combinator really likes to have people that are in their cohorts that are have actually experienced the problem firsthand and they're solving their own problem because they've done
Yeah.
80% of the work. Like when I went into the oil field, I will say that I didn't know, I never worked in the oil field in that way before. I didn't understand the lay of the land. I was truly like walking in at like beginner level 0 for the Zelda game. And I had to spend 2 to 3 years like writing 1,000-page memos to myself to figure it all out. Whereas I think
Yeah.
like your typical like, oil guy who's worked there for 5 years already has that framework. And so when he's like, man, I really wish I could do this. And if you just talk to that guy and just really get him to speak, he'll tell you. And that's where I love, love, love the mom test. The mom test, like if you can do anything and if you don't know what to do, is like come up with your ideal customer profile as like a hypothesis, find 10 of those people, and they have to be very similar. And then do the mom test. There's a free PDF, Google the mom test. And it's basically a way of like asking open-ended questions such as like, what's your top 3 problems right now? And how are you solving those problems? And if you do enough of those conversations, you'll start to see things that you didn't see before that you couldn't have known before you started asking. And I just think that's like the fundamental of that start of going to market.
Yeah. I've also read the mom test. I think I read that back in like 2020 or
Yeah,
something.
classic.
Um, Definitely interesting, and it's also touches on like a lot of like very common mistakes. I'll say people in startups, but everybody makes these mistakes of like not charging money for early product iterations and relying too heavily on your network for feedback. It's like this is why I think the cold outbound is so valuable because you can like test hypotheses about your product very quickly from people who don't care about you or hurting your feelings or telling you that you suck and that to never call you again. And like these are the things that like everybody wants to avoid. Like they don't want rejection. They want to talk to their friends. They want to talk to their mom, right, about their product. And it's like, oh, of course your mom's going to tell you that it's great and perfect.
Mhm.
Don't ever ask your mom what they think about your product. Um, and so that's one of the things like we're trying to do at SIFT. One of the many things like I've taken that sort of like philosophy um, to recruiting as well. Like I recruited the VP of engineering that we hired and the CTO and stuff like that, and all through cold email. And Yeah, it's way different than tapping your network. I think if I had a network to tap, if we had it collectively at SIFT had a good network to tap for those, maybe we would have. But since we didn't, I mean, we had to go cold outbound, and I just think there's like a really big value in talking to strangers about that stuff because they will tell you honestly like what they think, and if they think that you're a lunatic, they'll tell you that too, which is always good to know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think like the sales motion for outbound is very similar to the recruiting motion, which is you have to go reach out to a bunch of strangers with a value prop and a clear, cohesive like call to action, and you have to put them through a funnel. I mean, that's basically what it
Hmm.
is. Because I do the same thing for our sales recruiting because we have to hire all these SDRs and all these sales ops folks, et cetera. And it's very very similar. Uh, and it's really just a process of like you're getting the thing about hiring and recruiting is that generally speaking, like if you put up a job post, you get a lot of bullshit. But that's the same thing with cold email. It's like even if you have a decent list, you're gonna get a lot of weird responses. Then you have to sift through the out of offices and the what's this about? And I'm not the right person and like call me in 5 months. So I think like the interesting thing about recruiting and cold outbound as a sales motion is that most people don't get. Especially marketers that are used to inbound or SDRs that are only used to inbound, is they don't understand that it is you're literally dealing with people that are colder. I mean, colder in every sense of the word. And
Hmm.
their personalities are going to be colder. They don't trust you as much. They're colder on understanding. And so when I talk to people about outbound, I say, look, if you're going to do an outbound motion, just take every deal cycle that you think of and multiply it by 3 to 5. And so it's like if you have an inbound lead and you close in 2 weeks, multiply that by 3 to 5, right? So it's like all of a sudden the sales cycle gets amplified tremendously. Now, the exception to that rule is if
Yeah.
you have massive demand and it's like just a super hot, like must have thing. Like if all of a sudden, I don't know, you just like figured out how to make cars fly and you had a car that flew and you had the production to deliver. Yeah, you it probably doesn't matter if it's outbound or if it's inbound, you know? But generally speaking, if you don't have like a 10x better product, there's not some other like market force pushing people towards you, you're just going to have a much slower sales cycle. And that's a weird thing for inbound people to grasp their minds around, because a lot of the people that are coming out of that like $1 million to $2 million phase of their company, they're used to product led growth or a lot of word of mouth, or maybe they had some type of like organic channel where the founder was posting and they were just getting a lot of people off of Twitter. But all of a sudden they've kind of like stopped growing and they need to add an outbound motion, and they think like something is not working. And I'm just like, no, you're just dealing with a much different psychological state of the prospect, and you have to filter through a bunch more to get to the right people. Whereas before they were pre-selecting themselves through the content. They were watching it and they were interested and they were going through the buying cycles, and then they arrived at calling you. And that's why the deal cycles seem so short. But when you go outbound, it's like you got to come up with a random list. I mean, it's hopefully not too random, but even then it needs to be filtered down. So I think that's also an
Yeah.
interesting thing worth mentioning.
Yeah, the way so the way that we did recruiting over here was like I got a list of people with like certain demographic qualities located in the United States, with certain titles and who worked at companies and certain verticals and all that kind of stuff. And once I got that list, I used AI basically to analyze each candidate's LinkedIn profile and like rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, and only reached out to the people who scored like 8 or above.
Mm,
And so I would go from lists of like 10,000 people to like
mm,
2,000 and shave off like 80% of the list. And I think that is we did the same thing when we raised money, like when we were trying to figure out what venture capital firms to reach out to. And all of this was cold too. Like some, people are like, oh, 90% of VC deals are closed through a warm referral or whatever. You should always be tapping your network for recruiting. The recruiting thing I do agree with, because obviously for the people that you're going to work with, their work ethic and character matters, and that kind of stuff is hard to judge if you don't have some sort of backdoor referral reference point to make. I suppose the same thing could be said of VCs, because you are working alongside them to build your company in a similar regard that you would to like employees or coworkers, so to speak. Um, but their information is more public. Like you can go read about people who have worked with them and like go hit up other founders who, were in one of their funds and that sort of thing. Um, but I always just think it's funny, like everybody says that you have to like know somebody. I don't think you have to know anybody. I think you can just like blast a bunch of people on email and book meetings and get to know them that way. Um, and I think it's much like we were talking about. I think it's a much better test of whether or not you have a compelling value prop. Because the thing about like the phone is like if you're a smooth talker and you can apply a little bit of pressure in a non-salesy way, you can get meetings. But the way that I think about email versus the phone. So first of all, I am definitely like pro cold call. I'm not like don't think that cold calling is dead or anything crazy like that. But when you're emailing somebody, unless you have a truly compelling value prop, there is no reason for them to respond. Just delete, spam folder, delete, whatever. Um, and so I think it's actually a much better test of your value prop. I think with the phone, if you're good on the phone, you can book meetings that you shouldn't have. But I know this because I've done it. Like I've booked meetings with people who shouldn't really have taken meetings with
mhm.
me, you know? And it's a tough thing about optimizing the phone as a channel when you have somebody who's really good on the phone. I'm not saying I'm really good on the phone or anything, but I'm okay. I'm good enough, right? So but anyway, yeah, it's just funny. Like you don't need to know anybody. You can find some people. And I remember what I was going to say is that I think that the way that we're always going to do recruiting here at SIFT is through cold outbound. Like I don't ever want to put a job posting up. I have put a job posting up one time, and it wasn't a mistake or anything. I don't regret it. I do think that maybe there's a different kind of person who replies to a job posting than there is who responds to a cold outbound email about a job. Like maybe there's some psychological difference there. It might even be like the difference between people who never respond to email but always pick up their phone. because like I always pick up the phone if it doesn't come up as spam likely.
Mhm.
I don't have like phone filtering or anything set up. And I do read my email, but I don't always respond to like sales emails and stuff unless I think I don't even remember the last sales email I responded to because most of them are really bad. Um, but yeah, I'll stop there.
There's a good point, which is I think that like it's funny because I see certain types of people, I've talked to certain types of people that seem to get recruited a lot. And I can say as somebody who I think I have a pretty good resume. Like I think like, it's from a CRO perspective, multi-time founder perspective. I, maybe this is kind of like arrogant, but I'm surprised that the fact that I haven't been recruited more. Uh, and and I mean, like literally, like I don't think I've ever actually been heavily recruited, which is kind of crazy, like in a way,
Hmm.
where it's like there hasn't been some headhunter who's been like, I gotta have you in my network, and like there's this perfect job for you. Maybe it's happened like 4 or 5 times in my career, uh, but not often. And now, why am I saying that? It's because I think partially what makes an offer work is when it's extremely unique and rare. And I think that, like, from a recruiting standpoint, I also think that, like, most recruiting agencies are kind of lazy. I know that's kind of weird, but I just know from, like, hiring recruiters and headhunters, they usually go into an existing pool of people that they kind of knew, and or they put up a job post, and sometimes they'll do the outbound stuff, but it's like an old school poor SDR, right? They go on and they manually are just kind of like just clicking on like LinkedIn profiles, using the recruiter platform on LinkedIn, and it's just like the same thing you were doing in 2016, 2017. So I think that like your approach of using kind of the more modern stack, so such as like building a list and then pulling that down into Clay and then using some AI to filter it down based upon certain types of ICP criteria, ideal customer profile criteria, and then doing, I guess, some other like scoring on that criteria, I think is very interesting. And I think it's actually like something that I hadn't even thought about is like that's an offer to make to a recruiting agency, which is to like literally say to them like, hey, like we can like completely revolutionize the way that you actually do recruitment and be much better at it. Because I think that there's just not many people that do it that way, honestly, at this point, because it's really only been around in the present form for about 12 months. Maybe you can
Hmm.
say a little longer than that, but realistically, I remember even this time last year, people were still just like trying to wrap their heads around like what Clay was and like what these LLMs could do. And even the copywriting wasn't really that good at that time. So, I think we're still in the very early stages here. And I think that you are doing for yourself what all recruiting agencies probably should do. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, if I wanted to quit my job right now and go start a recruiting and fundraising agency, like I could go do it, and I could probably make quite a bit of money doing it. I actually somebody asked me about like why I don't just like quit my job and go start a fundraising agency. I think you actually have to have like a FINRA license or something to like get a cut of the profits from like the fundraise. That's not why I
Yeah.
wouldn't. I just because I don't want to do that. Like I'm happy where I'm at. But it was one of those interesting like niches I thought about. Because it is hard to raise money. But yeah, you can have AI go scrape the website and like go figure out what's in their portfolio. Like that's what we did, and the people who we ended up, it's like it's not public, so I can't like say who it is yet. It will be soon, but the company that the firm that we actually went with was involved in one of the largest exits in our
Mm.
industry, the MSP space ever, and like because of the tight filtering and like AI qualification that I did, I got so many emails back where they were like, I don't really usually respond to cold emails, but we actually exclusively look into companies like this and then all that kind of thing. And yeah, I'm not saying that necessarily to brag, but just to say that if anybody is interested in doing that kind of stuff, it's not like I'm like some kind of genius. Like I just told the AI to go to their website and see if they're a good fit for us, which is exactly what I would have done manually. It only would have taken me like 10,000 hours.
Yeah, right. So what is your stack? Like, so if you were like teaching us how to do that, like what I obviously know what others do, but I want to get your take on it. So like cradle to grave, like if you were setting that up from scratch, what tools do you use? How are you pulling your lists? How are you writing the prompts for the AI?
Um, Yeah, so the first thing I would do is get a list from somewhere. Like in the case of venture capital firms, there's a million, not a million, but there's a lot of websites out there where you can go find lists of venture capital firms. There's actually, and I hate to say this, but this is what happened. There was one website where you could go buy their list, but they have their entire list on the website with information about the companies. And I just went and scraped the whole thing, which I feel kind of bad about, but like also like, why do you have your whole list on the
Right.
website? Like I can just scrape it with instant data scraper. If anybody else wants to scrape free lists, go get instant data scraper. Just Google it, you'll find it. Um, and there's also and then I use a combination of Apollo, and then like I would also use the company search in Clay to find all these companies. And once I've got those all in a CSV, then I go enrich all of their LinkedIn profiles and their websites
Are you doing that within
and have
Clay?
an yeah, you can do I always tell people there's other ways to do this. This is just the way that I use Clay. I'm sure that there's other tools you can do this in. I just think Clay is like the easiest way to do this. So why would I bother? Like some people like, oh, you don't need to use Clay. You can just build like a bunch of spreadsheets and N8N workflows. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, but I could also just like pay for Clay
Yeah,
and
exactly.
not. Have you ever seen the meme about the guy who didn't want to use samples, so he learned to play all the instruments?
No.
Uh, well, okay, well, somebody out there's gonna know what I'm talking about. And he was like, "Oh, I didn't want to use samples because I felt like that wasn't authentic enough, so I learned to play all 5 instruments." And then I said, "Well, I don't want to buy instruments that I didn't make. That doesn't feel authentic enough." So then I learned to make a drum
Right.
set, and then I was like, "Well, I didn't feel like I should buy all the parts to a drum set." And so I haven't had, and so then I bought a goat farm, and I
Mm.
haven't had much time to to make any music because I've been too busy farming
Right,
goats.
right, right.
Um, and so like in this sort of like GTM engineer, like hacker, sales hacker space, some people will say this. They have this idea of like, oh, well, you should just build something. I'm like, I'm totally there with you, man. I'm building stuff all the time. But a lot of these guys who do kind of the same stuff that I do are very like penny wise and pound foolish with their
Yeah.
time. They don't want to like pay for a solution because it's like not cool enough or whatever, because they didn't build it. And like I'm definitely right there with them. I totally agree. But at a certain point, it's like, what am I going to learn? Like how to, you know, program a fucking Kubernetes cluster or something?
Yeah.
Like, no, I don't have time for that. So anyway, so you get all the list of their URLs and the LinkedIn profiles. You have AI go there, and in particular with the VCs, like I'd find out what kind of companies were in their portfolio, and then I would have AI analyze those companies. And are they, in our case, were they MSP, were they IT related, cybersecurity related? Um, and I for that I had like a low, medium, high fit score, or maybe like a 1 out of 4 or something like that.
And you were just
And
using a
basically like
prompt, like what LLM were you
mhm.
using?
Usually I use, so if when I'm scraping the websites, you can prompt all of these in Clay. So like you'll have a OpenAI uh key, you put your OpenAI key in there, and sorry, camera's getting blurry. There it is. It goes out of focus sometimes if I put my hand too close to the camera. Um, Usually I would be using 4.0 Mini for scraping the websites, but if I don't have to scrape it, or I already have the information within Clay, I'll just use 4.0, because 4.0 is like 10 times more expensive. But if you're just analyzing like a couple of paragraphs worth of data, it doesn't really cost anything. It's when you're scraping the website that it costs like a lot of money. And so I'd have like a couple of different cells of information that was scraped, and then I would send those cells to another cell where it would be analyzed and scored, and then I would just filter for high fit, and then I would enrich the contacts for that company. Anybody with like, um, gosh, what was it, like associate or investor? I would filter out everybody who was like in HR or finance or whatever. Um, and then just write email to them and have it personalized and by AI and be like, hey, I noticed that you invested in like X, Y, or Z company that is similar to us because of whatever, and we think you should take a look. But I mean, that's kind of like the short form version of the process. So hopefully, I don't know if that explained it
Yeah, no, it does. I
well.
think that like for people that aren't familiar with clay, it could be a little dense. So let me try to unpack
Yeah.
that for anybody listening. So if you are in B2B, you want to build a list. I know that seems like an obvious statement, but I think it's actually not as obvious as people think because they don't spend enough time defining the ICP like we started this whole podcast with. And then they also take even less time to build the list. And they just basically go to Apollo and they put in some basic criteria. And then they pull
Yeah.
down just like, 10,000 people and they go, oh, yeah, it kind of seems like the right titles. Yeah, it seems kind of good. Oh, yeah, good revenue levels. I think I got a good one here. 5,000 leads. Let's go download CSV, blast with an email or call. And if like it's like anything, like I said before, around like the left side of the what matters versus the right side, if a list is somewhere in there, like if you have like your industry and your ICP and your offer, and then at some point you have like a list, you know, if you get the list wrong, every other activity you take is really hurt. So if you have a SDR who's outbound cold calling, he's now calling on people so that are not right. So if it's even like 10% wrong, that means 10% of his time is wasted. 10% of his dials are wasted. Same thing if like on a cold email, like if you send to 10% of the wrong ICP, you're going to get a lot of people just unsubscribing and make you look like an idiot and reporting you as spam. So it's like for me, if there's like one thing I could say to anybody who is getting started in outbound B2B, just generally, really define your ICP and take like 10 times more time to craft the list and think about the list and score the list than you think you should, because it just will
Yeah.
make your life easier. Now, the reason that Ben and I use Clay is because Clay seems to be the best mousetrap, the best app out there that allows us to do that efficiently. Uh, and so when it comes to list building, you not only want to like define things by demographics or psychographics or histographics. So like you don't want to just say like I want men who are above the age of 35 that are CMOs in North America. Like that's a first piece of it. But then you can get into much deeper details, such as like, did this person recently comment on a LinkedIn post about a particular subject? Like use a Trigify for that, for example. Or does this person have an open job post about a certain thing that's relevant to my offer? So you can start adding on these contextual things. And Clay is very good at going and looking at these different sources and basically like cross-referencing different databases and pulling it all into one place to build a more complete, cohesive list, not just from the original list, but then to add on to it and make it better. But then it goes a step further where the beauty of Clay is that it has these like pre-built connectors into these large language models that allow us to essentially do analysis at the cell level. I don't mean like the human body cell level. I mean like in a spreadsheet, like a cell. And so if you
That would be cool though.
that would be cool. That'd be awesome. Maybe that's the next level of Clay. Um,
Need my cellular analysis plugin for Clay.
exactly. Yeah, you can just make myself like 10 times more like fucking jacked. Um, but yeah, so like think about it like Clay is like a smart sheet if you use that, or a Google Sheets, or just simply Excel. It's a spreadsheet. And it's like the user interface of a standard kind of table of a database. Now, what's weird and different between, say, this and Google Sheets is that it allows you at a column level, say if you have like column A, B, C, D, and E, you can do waterfall enrichment. So let's say like in column A, you have like company name, column B, you have contact name, column C, you have email, column D, you have like a LinkedIn profile, column, etc. You have more information about these people. Then at some point in some column down the row, you can say, okay, you can actually add and connect it using an API key to these large language models. And they have various ones, DeepSeek, you can do uh, ChatGPT, the variations of that. There's many different ones. And then you put it in, and then there's this little window where you can put in a prompt and say, basically, like, look up all these other variables in these other columns. And then using this prompt, such as like, write me a cold email that seems to be like between 100 and 150 words, this fifth grade reading level, and is kind of aggressive using the challenger sales methodology. I'm making that up off the spot. But the idea here is that it uses that prompt across all of the rows, which are all your individual contacts, and then it will do whatever you asked it to do. And so then you can write email copy, or you can have it like, do some type of analysis like, my ideal customer profile is, and just defines it. Uh, create a score of 1 to 4, 4 being extremely perfect fit and 1 being extremely wrong fit, and then 2 and 3 being somewhere in the middle, and grade this person based upon these criteria. And then in the next column, give me the output. And then you can use that ranking to say, like, if output is 4, um, you know, do something with it. So that's the idea of Clay, is it just allows people, without being a full stack developer or coder or even technical at all for that matter, who's kind of just good at using like, web-based tools like Google Sheets, to build lists at scale faster and get better outputs without being a data engineer. I should be like a Clay salesperson. But that's basically the gist of it for anybody listening.
Yeah, so the way that the people over at Clay always put it is that they gave salespeople the power of developers, and so I would agree with that sentiment. But yeah, the thing is about your ICP is that a lot of people, if you ask them your ICP, first of all, if you ask 5 sales reps from the same company what their ICP is, they're all going to give you different answers, which is a problem to start. Like, you guys should all be in lockstep. Duck walking down the street or goose stepping down the street, with knowing what your ICP is, right? And so that's problem number one. But second problem is that, let's say that you do find a company where all 5 or 50 sales reps tell you the exact same thing about what their ICP is. 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you something like, they're going to act like the Apollo filters, which is like the bane of my existence as a salesperson, because that's not what defines an ICP. Oh, well, we work with construction companies in the United States with over 1,000 people.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that's not an ICP. That's a demographic filter in a sales tool. That's not an ICP. Like, an ICP would be like, we work with construction companies with over 1,000 but under 5,000 employees in the United States, that build sewage systems and have employees with a high level of technical proficiency, who are undergoing enterprise business transformation, trying to implement AI into their ERP system. Like, that's an ICP. You know what I'm saying? Like, we got to go like 10 times deeper than what most people do. And yeah, again, like the automation, the AI, it's scaling your good behavior or your bad behavior. And if your list is the strategy, like, a lot of people like complain about the AI and all the modern sales tools, and they like blame Clay for stuff that it doesn't have anything to do with. They're like, oh, these Clay spammers are like really pissing me off or whatever. And I'm not saying that there's not lead gen agencies out there that are just using Clay to spam people. Like, I've done it, so I know that it's happening. But the way that I do things now, especially like the way that we're talking about it, is I want to take a list of 10,000 companies and I want to get rid of 90% of those. I want to take a, I want a list that's so good that I can email every person the exact same message and still get a very high reply rate, which is what I've done that before. Like, in a lot of my campaigns, I don't even use any personalization at all, because instead of finding 1,000 people with 10 different problems and writing 10 different emails to these 1,000 people, I want to find 1,000 people who have the exact same problem right now that I can send the exact same message to and get positive responses. Um, and the same thing goes for cold calling too. Like, I don't really believe in people researching cold calls, just because if you're making 100 calls a day or something like that, what are you gonna like research 100 calls a day? This is actually something that I find very interesting about Clay, is that you can actually do that research. Whereas before I would say, researching cold calls is a waste of time. And it's kind of is, because like, there's this idea about show me, you know me, which is just nonsense, because like, you don't know them.
Mhm.
So why are you trying to show them that you know them? One of my buddies was funny. He said, if somebody tries to show me that they know me, I'm going to call the cops. Which I thought was funny. Um, and so anyway, like, yeah, in Clay, or however you want to do this, I don't want to sound like I'm like shilling Clay or whatever, but you can research 1,000 companies at scale and find out news about them. And I did this when I was actually cold calling for at SIFT, when we were recruiting CTOs. In my dialer, like, I did the research in Clay, and I would have a section in the dialer that would show me the data from the CSV that I uploaded, right? So interesting facts about them. And so in the conversation, I could like weave that into the conversation, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, my whole philosophy is just like totally different than what the traditional philosophy on list building and lead enrichment and stuff is. And I think people are now beginning to like wake up to this a little bit and create like we're collectively creating a more efficient market by doing this stuff, which I think is a net positive because when you have an inefficient market, it's bad for the economy, it's bad for the country, it's annoying to buyers. We want a very efficient market, right? Like when you have highly researched lists, like that creates efficiency, and it prevents you from wasting your time. It increases your conversion rates, it decreases churn. It creates more raving fans. Like that's the other thing. Like people don't really think about this. Like when you have a better list, you're going to decrease churn. You're going to decrease the cost of, customer service. You're going to increase the efficiency of ads, like all this stuff. And like these lists that I'm making, like they're not just going to go into the dialer or into the emailer. They're also going to go into, the ad platforms that we use and things like that. Like there's like crazy ripple effects from being able to filter down a list. And I always tell people, when they're complaining about like AI prospecting or whatever, they're like, oh, these people are just loading up lists of like 10,000 companies and just spamming them. I'm like, I'm trying to like eliminate 90% of the list because chances are 90% of the list is never going to convert anyway. Like, let's see if we can find that 90% and just like get rid of
Mhm.
them. Um, so yeah, that's sort of my philosophy on the whole
Yeah,
deal.
I think the the ICP definition, this comes back to the beginning, is if you can do anything right, get the ICP really dialed in, and then spend it an inordinate amount of time to do that kind of shaving away of all the excess fat. And I think this applies not only for, like you said, everything. It's like to what you do with ads. It's what you do with your cold calling. It's what you do with your emails, with your direct message, LinkedIn messaging. But also, it's like the standard by which your SDRs and your sales team can measure whether the deals are actually qualified or not. And so, like, there's a typical like MEDPIC, BANT type of acronyms for qualification, like budget, authority, need, time. But I think like every qualification standard should have like a, is it the right person? It's like, is it like literally just an ICP fit? Because I think if you just did that in itself, it really just gets rid of a bunch of people. Especially if you have like, for example, like in LinkedIn, I get, I don't know, five of these guys a day coming in, and they're all over the place. I mean, everyone you can imagine. And for me, it's like if I don't have like the most basic understanding of like who am I going to be offering something to, I become like, well, I could make an offer for this guy, and I can make an offer for that guy, and all of a sudden you just go crazy as an entrepreneur. But as a sales guy, I think salespeople like intuitively and naturally just want to pitch, and they're just like, I'll pitch to anybody. There's a warm body, and so there's like a good saying in like sales, which is like AGM, another good meeting. AGM, another good meeting. And people just feel good about having a meeting, even if it's like the worst meeting, the worst fit whatsoever. So I think it's like a key thing that culturally across the entire revenue motion, from list building all the way through like the final close, and even on customer success, is like just constantly ask, is this person my ICP? We go so far to say that like it's even about how they think about, like there's like how neurotic is the person, because we have some founders that come on that want lead generation, but they're so neurotic and so like OCD that it's a pain in the ass to work with. So I want my customer success people on the back end to be like, hey, this guy's like really up my ass. And we actually track time by client. So I can see in QuickBooks how much time is being hourly spent on delivering the services to this person. If I see like a 3x more time investment to get the same result, then I know there's something going on with the client where they're kind of OCD and whatnot. So I think partially, especially as a service-based business, is like just asking, who do I want to spend time with? And are these the people I actually like enjoy servicing? But that helps across the entire supply chain. One thing I'll also say, and this kind of gets back to like, this is like definitions of like, okay, what is qualified, which is ICP, but also from a process perspective, like this is a completely different thread of an idea, but it's like, we talked about what is the role of an SDR, and how do you know if somebody's good or bad, or like what should they be doing or what should they not be doing? And what kind of skill set should they have or should they not have? And I think that like the deeper question that I think gets glossed over, which remember at the right side of my what matters matrix, it's the salespeople. So they're the last person I care about in terms of the entire motion, like the entire sales and marketing B2B paradigm. And for me, I think like a critical part in addition to the list is just the sales operations. Because like if you actually look at like we talked about um, the ACV, right? Yeah, or the LTV, the question becomes, where does that cost come from? Like cost to acquire a customer. Where does that cost come from? So obviously there's media buying if you do ads. There's infrastructure on emails or on software like Clay, or on agencies or on salespeople, or on tech stacks for like CRMs. All of that stuff adds to cost. Now you can add that all in, and then you can find out your cost to acquire. And so the question becomes, well, what percentage of the cost actually comes from the lead demand gen side versus the sales motion post lead capture? And I've looked at this deeply, and basically across the board, except if you have just a tremendous demand with an amazing product and just like heavy like inbound led growth, 80 to 90% of the cost to acquire the customer is actually post lead capture. And so that means that like, okay, let's say you spend $300 to set a meeting with cold email, including all agency fees, including like all the other costs associated with it. Uh, and and then there's a question of, okay, let's say you have like a 80% show rate, and then of those you have a 60% qualification rate, and of those you have a 90% proposal rate, and of those you get a 50% term sent, and then a 30% close, or I don't know, like something like that. Once you see those drop offs across those conversion points in the post lead capture sales process, you're looking at a lot of cost. So you might start with 100,000 people on your list, but once you get like a 3% reply rate and a 5% interested reply rate, and then like a 30% meeting set rate, it's like by the end of it, it's like you have 100,000 people on the list and you've closed like 4 deals. And so like for me, I like there's something like fundamentally flawed about that in my opinion. And I feel like the way to get much better results is just to start with a better list, and then just be more precise and strategic about how you're approaching that list, and do it multi-channel, and just like really give a shit. If you do that, you're like better than most people. And I think that's what makes a good SDR is like, it's actually the SDR. It's mostly not the SDR's fault. It's usually the sales operations fault. And it's usually the person who defined the list in the ICP in the first place, and the person that created the product in the first place. And they have this shitty product. They're trying to go to market. They have this poor guy who just graduated college. He's calling on a list that's like 50% bad phone numbers and the wrong ICP. He's not getting results. And then like, they're like, what the hell's going on? Why do you suck? And it's like, well, it's not his fault. Yeah. And so anyways, I'm gonna get off my
Tell
high
them you
horse.
do it. You get on the phone and do it,
Yeah, exactly.
but they won't, which is why the SDRs, yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, dude, I gotta run in a minute
Yeah.
here.
So, well, guys, where can we, find you then?
So my LinkedIn and my Twitter are both going to be in the show notes. I'll throw my YouTube in there too, even though I don't really update my YouTube these days, but maybe somebody will find something on there that they like. Yeah, besides that, I mean, cyft.ai, if you want to know more about the company that I work for. I'm guessing it probably won't be super relevant for most of the people on this show, but definitely got to plug them.
How do you spell them?
Yeah, cyft.ai.
Okay, great. And, can you say your full name on LinkedIn?
Yeah, it's my full name is motorcycle emoji Benjamin. I don't have a last name on LinkedIn, so it's kind of hard to look me up on there. But my URL will be in the show notes, so that's what I would look for.
Cool. Any final thoughts? Any other things you want to add? No worries if not.
Yeah, one thing I do want to plug is my company does have a podcast called MSP Insider. It's hosted by one of the co-founders, Jeff Newton. It's for MSPs, IT service providers who want to get better at sales, marketing, and operations. But I find great value in it, even though I'm not one of those people. So definitely highly recommend. And maybe I'll send you the link to that as well if you want to throw that in the show notes.
Sounds great. All right, guys. Well, thanks again for listening to the Next Gen Sales Leader podcast. We'll see you on the next one. Signing out.
Appreciate it.